Hello, everybody. Hi, it's very nice to be here. Thank you, whoever whistled. That's why I spend the time in the gym. I'm Paul Brody. I'm the global blockchain leader at EY. It's really nice to be here. It's so nice to be in front of actual live people in 3D. Is excellent. It's excellent to meet people in person, to talk to them, and I'm really thrilled to be here. I'm going to talk about a couple things this evening, but first of all, thank you, Rachel. Where'd you go? Rachel just zipped out of here. Rachel is, I have great appreciation for Rachel because so many journalists just reproduce like press releases, and Rachel actually understands what's going on and asks thoughtful questions and has thought about public and private blockchains. And really, I think everybody now is like, oh yeah, public blockchains, definitely. Rachel was the first mainstream journalist or industry analyst who understood this. And so I will always be grateful for your insight there. I also want to thank the folks at Provide for organizing this, for Mr. Walpert, our partners in crime over at Baseline, because that is a huge project. But for those of you who don't know EY, how many are familiar with EY? Lovely professional services firm. We are really the only sort of big global professional services firm that is absolutely committed to public blockchains, that we are absolutely committed to the Ethereum ecosystem, that we invest in this ecosystem, right? We develop code like zero-knowledge proofs, and we give it away as public domain, open source output. And this is... John and I had this conversation at the beginning of the work that we did together, which is what we need to do is one of the reasons why Baseline is fully open source with no strings attached is because we want to make it easy for people to use and adopt. So I'm very proud about that. Really proud about our layer 2 relationship with Polygon and what's the announcement that Polygon made a couple weeks ago with us. They are building a layer 2. It's going to be the first Ethereum layer 2 that is privacy focused. It's a ZK optimistic rollup. It's going to be called Polygon Nightfall, and it's built on the open source technology that EY developed and contributed into the public domain. So I'm really, really proud about that. Privacy is hugely undervalued in our ecosystem, right? People deserve privacy. Enterprises need privacy. If we want to make the blockchains, really the Ethereum ecosystem, the place where enterprises can do business and not on private blockchains, we must have privacy for business logic, for transfers and payments, for all of the things that enterprises need to do. Baseline is a huge step forward to that. Adding additional functionality around privacy is incredibly important to us. Secondly, I'm just really thrilled. This is a perfect time for me to speak. I can't force it or require it, but I do believe that my talks are better with a 2-drink minimum. And so now that you've had dinner and a couple of drinks, if you haven't had a couple of drinks, the bar is open. It's self-service. Just pick a bottle and get a straw. Before I go into my talk, I just want to show you something that I'm really proud of. It's awesome. If you want to know more about what we do and our stuff, you can visit us at blockchain.ey.com. And we actually have a whole bunch of services, and if you go to your dashboard, you can see we've got smart contract testing. You can simulate smart contracts. You can test to see if they really comply with standards. We have a tax calculator. We have a Bitcoin Explorer and Visualizer. How many of you know about the whole Quadriga CX work? The Quadriga, the scandal there. So first of all, I definitely recommend go listen to Exit Scam, which is an excellent podcast. It tells all the story of Quadriga. But we, EY, were brought in by the Canadian government to help sort out the bankruptcy. And our engineering team and a lot of our developers spent a lot of time tracking where the money went or didn't go. And our Bitcoin Explorer and the visualization tool is the outcome of that work. We said we cannot do this by hand. We need to automate it. So it's really fun stuff. We can do supply chain production and so on. But one thing I want to share with you that I just really am proud of, from our system, in our web application, you can just go and pick the blockchain you want. Right now, we default onto the Ropsten test network on the Ethereum mainnet, right, or the Ropsten testnet. But you'll notice you just click a button, right? You can just click a button and you can switch over to the Polygon, the Mumbai testnet, right? And over time, we're going to add more and more of these different networks, including BSN and their open permission public blockchain in mainland China. And of course, when you sign up for the main service, you can click on the Ethereum mainnet as well. And this is something I'm really proud of. We announced our Polygon integration. You could do this on day one. And so it wasn't like, hey, this is something we're going to do. This is something we are doing. And we have a really tremendous shared roadmap that we're building out with Polygon that's fully committed to the layer 2 ecosystem in Ethereum, right? And open source and open access and public infrastructure. All right, let me stop with the advertising and let me switch into the content. So I'd like to spend my short time today just talking about how we make blockchain put to work for a better world, right? DeFi is, I think we will look back upon DeFi as kind of the tipping point, what moved blockchain from this interesting thing where, gosh, that seems kind of cool, to it is a real business, it is a big business, right? We are like up to our eyeballs in work around DeFi and financial services. We had a huge milestone last year. We don't disclose revenue, but I can tell you that for the first time ever, we recorded more than $100 million in sales at EY Blockchain. So if we were if we were an independent firm, people would be like, yeah, that's amazing. And of course, inside at EY, people are like, so Paul, are you guys ever going to be like a real business? But one day, I believe we will get some respect inside of a firm the size of EY. But blockchain is going to be tremendously powerful. It's going to transform the world. And I want to hit on a couple of key points. First of all, as Joe was talking about, regulation is coming, and we should be fine with it, right? The reality is that blockchain is going to be better for regulation. The truth is, something like 70% of all the money that went into initial coin offerings was stolen or wasted. Mostly stolen. There was a lot of fraud. There's a lot of scams. And by the way, there's just a huge number of insider preferences. If you look at a lot of these DAOs and some of the other protocols, they have very complicated rules. And if you really understand them, they seem fair and reasonable. But the reality is the more complicated the rules are, the more they favor insiders who know how to manage them, right? Now, that doesn't mean that blockchain is all bad. And in fact, I would argue, actually, that blockchain ecosystems have performed extremely well overall, but regulation can actually bring a lot of really positive value to this ecosystem, right? If you think about going onto like a finance website, right, you can have comparables. You can see all these different financial metrics that are the same for every company. You can have standardized data, standardized disclosure. One of the things that is really amazing about regulatory compliance is it levels the playing field for everybody. Right? A rule that exists outside in the financial world is requirements for fair disclosure. It's a simple rule. If you're going to tell somebody something that's meaningful and important about your business, you need to tell everybody at the same time. That's reasonable. That's fair. That will make the system better. And we should look forward to that level of transparency, accountability, and standardization. It will treat everybody better. Right? So if you hear lots of people complaining about regulation, you should pause and think about the fact that it will make the blockchain ecosystem even better than it already is. Right? Now, regulatory compliance is not cheap. It's not free. Right? In fact, it can be frustratingly expensive, but I would like to point out that we should set that in context. Right? We have reached the point where we're about a $2 trillion ecosystem. The biggest DAOs can absolutely afford the cost related to regulatory compliance. They are hardly crushing in the context of hundreds of millions or billions of dollars in capital in these systems, right? And the crowdfunding limitations that exist today are perfectly reasonable in terms of getting a start as a business. So I think we should look upon this as a cost of doing business, but a manageable cost of doing business. And I want to set this in context because you'll hear people say, like, they're going to strangle the blockchain industry like they did, the banking industry. Would that be so terrible? The banking industry that is supposedly laboring under an impossible layer of regulation is just 100 times larger than the blockchain industry is today. And I think we could be pretty happy with growing, say, 50 more times, right? We're only a $2 trillion business right now. But if we can get to a level where we have the same level of compliance and same standards as exist in banking and finance, I believe what's going to happen is every financial asset that's out there, every bond, every stock, most bank deposits, they're going to be wrapped, they're going to be tokenized, and they're going to be deployed into the Ethereum ecosystem. And we're going to go from being a $2 trillion ecosystem to a $200 trillion ecosystem. So we should look forward to that. I think we should embrace that. In fact, we should try to bring that forward, not slow it down. Now, we can make kind of the blockchain ecosystem better. We can also make the whole financial ecosystem better using blockchain technology, right? Our existing, some people call it TradFi, some people call it CFI, right? The existing centralized financial system is highly effective for very specific things. It can do massive scalability, but for relatively simple transactions. Think about credit card systems, right? They can do hundreds of millions of transactions a day, right? You don't buy a song online for $1 and pay $35 in gas, right? These systems are incredibly efficient, and they are not just from a technical standpoint, but also from a carbon footprint standpoint, right? But they don't handle any form of complexity, right? Any form of business logic, right? They're not good at dealing with multiple parties with rules about if this, then that, when you hit $1 million in purchasing, give me a discount, right? Who has the voting rights and things like that. Blockchain is perfect for complexity. Centralized systems are perfect for massive volume and simplicity. Blockchain is perfect for complexity. And we actually need some complexity, right? The DeFi system is able to put a tremendous amount of logic and complexity into the financial system, and it's able to do it with incredible speed, right? If you go to DeFiPulse.com, which is a great place to just look at the list of all those services, there are now 200. There are more than 200, right? So in the space of 18 months, we went from like stable coins as a place to park your money when there's nothing else to do with it, to 200 different financial services that are all largely interoperable, right? That's an incredible level of innovation and a staggering level of sophistication, right? And by the way, along the way, over the last 18 months, we have basically put an end, I believe, we are long past the discussion about whether or not the Ethereum ecosystem can scale. It can, it has, it's done, right? And I was in New York earlier this week. I went to a whole bunch of the major banks and securities firms, and people are always asking me, like, are there other ecosystems? Is Ethereum ever going to scale? And my answer is, we are past that discussion, right? The global financial ecosystem is moving to Ethereum, and Ethereum is massively scalable. And don't ask me about when 2.0 is coming. It doesn't matter, right? If I can put 10 million transactions a day on a single layer 2, and I can basically have an almost unlimited number of layer 2s, I think we're there. I think we are there, and I'm not worried about that anymore. So I'm extremely optimistic about kind of this future path forward that we are headed down. And if you think about, Base Ledger, Polygon, Arbitrum, Scale, there are so many layer 2s that are out there, some of them with very specific purposes. Polygon Nightfall, for example, is going to be a privacy-focused layer 2. You're not going to use it unless you really want privacy for a set of transactions. Where do I see things going? So right now, I believe over the next few years, there's going to be 3 big trends that we will see driving the kind of transformation going on in financial services. The first is access. If you're in the traditional financial services world, your bank is going to be offering you Ether, Bitcoin, and very quickly what I'll call a curated selection of DeFi services, right? And I think we will see that already starting by the end of this year. Some of the fintech players have hired and built phenomenal, really phenomenal, like blockchain technology teams. Secondly, tokenization, right? One of the things that all the traditional financial system has is they're sitting on trillions of dollars of existing assets, stocks, bonds, mortgages. They are going to tokenize those assets and deploy them into the DeFi ecosystem so they can borrow against them, so they can securitize them, so they can deliver services against them, right? They're going to put those assets to work at a level that's just not been done before. I'm going to be careful. I'm going to trip over this thing, and then it's going to make some kind of blooper reel later, right? And then finally, what we're going to see, the sort of end stage is what I'll call integration, right? There's this old joke like organizations that oppose each other come to resemble each other. The banks are busy getting into crypto and blockchain, right? All the crypto and blockchain firms are busy getting banking licenses. But the end state is that when you need to move money or put an asset to work, and you're going to give, somebody could give you an email address, they could give you a bank routing number, they could give you an Ethereum address, it doesn't matter, you won't care anymore. You'll just be able to do it. It'll all look the same to you. Everything will be in a sort of single window, fully transparent model. You'll open up your web page and you will see dollars, stocks, crypto assets, NFTs, real estate. You'll see it all in a single window. And at a click of a button, you'll be like, I want to borrow against this, I want to lend that out, I'm going to sell that, I'm going to move that on. And you're not going to know or care how the plumbing works. You're just going to know that the plumbing works. So let me talk a little bit about what is the good of all of this, because I think it is very important right now for us to be thinking about how are we putting this technology to work for a constructive purpose. And my answer is we need to put all this capital that we have to work because we have some big bills to pay. $4.5 trillion to decarbonize the electric grid. $4 trillion to close the educational gaps just in this country, and another $3 trillion in climate mitigation. That's just for the US. We need to spend about $10 trillion over the next decade, right, to improve the quality of life and the life that we live here in this country. My argument is that we should be able to easily find $10 trillion using DeFi. I know that sounds crazy, but hear me out. Velocity is the measure of how busy your money is. If you have $1 and it sits in the bank account for a year and it doesn't do anything, it's not very busy, right? And it turns out that the rate at which we spend our money, that it moves around, that it does things, has been going down and down and down. It took a bit of a nosedive during the pandemic when everybody saved money and held on to it. But honestly, the velocity of money, the rate at which we make it do stuff, has been declining for 50 years. It's at its lowest level today in 50 years. And as a country, we could easily find $10 trillion over the next decade just by putting all of our money to work, right? And that is what I believe is going to be possible, right, with the DeFi ecosystem. And in particular, what we hear over and over again is that investments in climate change mitigation, in education funding, in green energy actually deliver pretty good returns, at least compared to, say, your typical interest-bearing checking account, which is basically zero, right? So, I mean, today, if you can get 6%, 7%, you're like a superhero, unless you're in crypto, in which case you're probably doing a little bit better, right? And by the way, there's a guaranteed market because most of the world's biggest companies have pledged to become carbon neutral by 2030, right? So there's huge demand if you can figure out how to meet it. The problem is we're not investing at a level that implies that we really believe these return on investment numbers. So I believe kind of one or two things are true. Either we're just kidding ourselves, or possibly we just don't know how to capture this ROI, right? We're sitting on a great opportunity, we don't know how to capture it. And my argument, my belief, is that blockchain and DeFi make it possible to capture return on investment in ways that we could not do before. So if you take something like green energy, right? We need to be able to find sites to build it. This is not a simple thing. You want to build a wind farm or a solar farm, you need a site, you need locations. You need to trace how much inputs have you put in this. If you're a company and you've pledged to be carbon neutral, one of the first things you're going to have to figure out is how much carbon are you actually putting out, right? Because carbon that you're putting out has to be offset by carbon that you take out, right? And then you have to have external verification. This is a complicated process to meet these carbon goals, right? If somebody says, hey, I'm going to be carbon neutral by 2030, that means that by 2030 you need to count your carbon output, you need to count your carbon input, and you need to have an independent third party verify that your outputs minus your inputs equals zero. What kind of infrastructure could we use to do all of that? I would say blockchain, right? Blockchain is able to do this in a way that we really have never been able to do in the traditional financial ecosystem before. And so I believe smart contract infrastructure is the way that we put investment capital work, and make sure that we're actually getting the market and generating the return for these commitments. Now, I want to just point out a little bit of an interesting historical analogy. Every big industrial transformation, the first kind of coal revolution, the first industrial revolution, all industrial revolutions have required a revolution in information technology, right? And I believe that the next generation of our energy infrastructure, of our manufacturing infrastructure, requires a new generation of technology. And I just, to help kind of seal the deal, I want to help everybody understand a little bit of history. Many people don't realize that the reason the telegraph network exploded in the early days of rail travel was you needed a system to make sure that two trains didn't hit each other while sharing one set of tracks when the train went out of the line of sight. The telegraph network literally grew in England in lockstep with the railway network. You needed telegraphs because if you had a telegraph between two stations, you could have two trains running on the same track at the same time without hitting each other, right? You got double the capital output, at least from that train track. By the way, same thing happened with cargo freight. The very first Hollerith punch card machines went to some big railroads, right? Hollerith punch card machines were the very first, the predecessors of IBM mainframes, right? And the demand came from the necessity to keep track of all those way bills for freight, right? How to collect all that money and turn it into capital spending. The world's first mainframe transaction processing system was built by IBM for the electric utility industry to total up energy utility bills, right? Information technology making industrialization scale, right? So I believe if we want to see a renewable energy revolution, if we want to see a distributed energy revolution, we need to have a distributed computing revolution to go with that. So what will success look like when we get there? My argument is, my expectation is, it will look like a mess, right? The plumbing will work, but it will not be elegant, right? But it will work, and nobody will notice or care. So that is kind of how these things work. If you understand how most things work, you're usually horrified that they work at all. That's going to be true for our DeFi and ESG revolution as well. So I think I'm even 2 minutes over time, so I don't know if I have time for questions or complaints. We have no time for questions or complaints. That's a good relief. Thank you all. I'm not here all week, so this is the limit of my entertainment that you get. Oh, I got one final thing. We are giving away NFTs for all the attendees here. All you have to do is go to the EY banner, which is right behind us, and there's a QR code, and everybody who wants to swing by there, you'll get a proof of attendance protocol token. So take that home. One day it will be worth millions of dollars. This is not investment advice. Lawyers told me to say that. All right, there you are, sir.
Glad you're here, man.